Thanks, Jim. Just want to make sure everybody can see my screen okay.
We can, sir. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Paul.
Or I'm sorry, Paul. So as Paul alluded to, I'm going to speak to you about some of the uses that we have with our UAS program in Indiana right now. So initially, I'd spoken with the group about how Indiana has created a crash scene mapping and data processing center through Purdue University and our Criminal Justice Institute. So in collaboration with those two agencies, we go around the state of Indiana and we provide free training to public safety agencies. During those trainings, there are a 5 to 6 hour workshop that we put on for the agencies, and we train them in hands-on field exercises. We show them how to prep a scene and marking procedures that we use as common practice in the crash reconstruction area. And then we've developed a checklist for the agencies to use. So this is a checklist that covers their scene setup as well as then their flight settings for the UASs when they put them up to capture a specific crash scene. Once the agencies capture that, we have a secure submission process where the agency can share those files collected or photos collected with Purdue University. Purdue University has created a central processing unit for us. So when I submit my crash photos to Purdue University, they will take those photographs, process them, and then give us those output back. And then that output then goes to the specific agencies through another secure file sharing. And then they receive information on how they can open the specific images and get specific information from those, such as measurements and other information. One of the other parts of the program is that when agencies send their pilots through the Part 107 training, when they take that certification exam, the processing center will reimburse that pilot or that agency for that test fee once they successfully pass that. To date, we started the program in 2020 through the Criminal Justice Institute, and with COVID, we performed 18 webinar series reaching out to about 1,250 individuals. And then during that time, we've also been able to perform 30 hands-on workshops, reaching out to about 800 participants in that. Currently, of those 800 participants, we still have just over 430 participants that are still in the program and submitting information to that. So to date, with the processing center, we've processed 325 scenes through the processing center. We have 64 participating agencies. Of those 64, 47 of those agencies have submitted images for processing, and that usually takes 2 to 3 days depending on how many scenes are at the university level. So really where we're looking at that whole process there is the traditional way. We're trying to get away from the traditional longer methods of total stations. So the UAS mapping really reduces that response activity and that on scene time when we're looking at the TIM timeline. So with that, we've had opportunity to look at some work zones. So unfortunately, we had a dangerous work zone in Indiana back in the 2021 timeframe, and we looked at several crashes that happened in that geographical area. We had a bridge redecking that was occurring in that area, and kind of the geometry of that site caused us to have several fatalities and serious crashes within a short time frame. So this is one of the crashes where a semi ran off the right side of the roadway. Again, using UAS, we were able to go in there and within a 45-minute time frame, collect all the images and accurately document that scene so that we could start on the recovery process and getting the roadway open back up. Same evening as one of our incidents, we had cleaned up that incident, and a Tesla came into that construction area. It originally came in that they hydroplaned and crashed. or a vehicle fire. When we got there, we found out that the Tesla had entered that area. The navigation system got confused by the markings and struck the interior wall on that. Unfortunately, within that 2 to 3 month time frame, we had several fatalities occur in this, all involving commercial vehicles, where we shut down that roadway for an extended period of time. Again, using UAS, we were able to quickly go in and document those large scenes very quickly, and then get in there and start the recovery process and start that process of opening that roadway back up. So in using that, we obviously identified we had a problem in this area. So we went out and we flew that particular area in conjunction with the Department of Transportation, Purdue University's research program. We flew that area and mapped that scene as it was. And this is kind of a scene of how that traffic was flowing through that particular area. We had a downhill left-hand curve going into a restricted bridge area. So again, you can see how the semis in here passing very closely as they come into that restricted area. So with that information, Purdue University started looking at the connected vehicle data. They were looking at how the speeds varied in those particular areas. So they began to look at that, and then they began looking at the hard braking data. And you can see the spike in the hard braking data in that particular area when this construction project began. So Purdue sent a LiDAR vehicle through there, both using the connected vehicle data, and then we used our UAS imagery to then overlay that hard braking data. So as we know, the typical applications for lane closures and temporary restrictions or barriers for bridge redecking in those particular areas. Again, we have that, those standards that are typically used in the construction area. But what we were able to do is actually use the UAS flights to go in and document how the actual scene was, or how that area was. Through that, we were able to identify that we had narrowed lane widths that were had gone past what the restrictions were set up. And then they identified alignment geometry issues with that particular zone. So again, the redecking, NDOT got with the contractors, looked at this information, and they came up with recommendations that they implemented on December 15th for correcting some of the issues that they had identified. One of the main things that they looked at was, as that approach and transition into that bridge decking area, they realigned the traffic so that the drivers were coming into that more of a straight approach or a lessened approach in that, as opposed to the severe curve that they experienced as they came directly into that. They also improved the lane widths. They had found that the contractor had made the lane widths narrower than what had been allowed. And they corrected the lane widths to that 12-foot lane width through the curve area. They improved the lane markings, and the barrel patterns initially had been set out along the shoulder of the road. So as they looked at that, they went in and added that visual barrier, that visual cueing for the drivers, and realigned the barrels so that they followed that fog line or shoulder area more accurately into that transition. They also looked at how the exit out of that area was. So they looked at the section of bridging as they come across and then go into that downstream transition, again improving that lane width and giving the drivers more of a visual reference as they navigated through that area. We saw that the results of that, the combination of the UAV flights and the hard braking overlay data, that we had an immediate reduction in crashes, and that reduction continued through the entirety of the project. So we looked at that model and we said, well, how can we use this in our other areas? So the state has identified 6 major construction areas through the state of Indiana. And in those areas, what we've done is we've looked at the hard braking data associated with those construction sites. If they see that there's high incidence of hard braking or reduced speeds in those areas, Purdue will take this heat map data and identify those areas where we need to go out and fly. So we will go to those areas. We will fly the areas as the site is laid out so that then they can look at the geometry of those areas as well as overlay their hard braking data associated with that. So the red dots here indicate where there's hard braking. So as we look at, this is a transition area where it goes into a bifurcation area. And so those drivers had that decision making of whether they were going to go to the left or right. And a lot of that was occurring at the last second, as indicated. So we began to analyze that. And the nice thing about doing the UAV flights is we get an exact geometry as opposed to using a satellite image from Google or some of the other map sourcing. We're able to go in and actually fly the site as it's laid out and see where those events are occurring in relation to the true geometry of the area. So in this particular area, we had the bifurcation area. The bifurcation area then created where we had US 52 merging into I-65 and created challenges associated with that because drivers didn't have that normal transition area to where they could merge into traffic. Plus they were merging into 1 lane of traffic as opposed to 2 lanes as it was originally designed. So again, a good indication of where that hard braking events are occurring in those areas. Purdue University looked at the hard braking events prior to this project and bifurcation going in. So we see respectively for those areas, 143 events on one side and 77 events at that ramp transition area. But we see the huge increase in those events, and obviously they worked with the designers and crews in that area to try to improve those hard brakings and transition areas. So what we've transitioned to is we've gone from mapping the work zones and now looking at how can we use the data to look at after action reports. So with that, we're specifically looking at how can we impact the TIM timeline. So that T0 through T6 timeline. So we're starting to look at both the heat map data, how traffic is impacted by these events, as well as look at how we can improve the times and analyzing how the emergency responders are on scene. In the particular case here, we had a secondary crash that occurred just moments after the initial scene had been cleared. So that queued traffic was starting to move as they started to open up this area, and a secondary crash. So we're trying to identify if we could have opened that area up a few minutes earlier had we been able to avoid that secondary crash. So this crash was again an engine fire that took place on a truck. As you can see on the left-hand screen, that's the eastbound traffic. The initial responding agency blocked eastbound traffic to fight the westbound incident. And so we worked with them to try to identify ways that they could access those areas without contributing to traffic issues on those non-involved sides. So again, looking at the CAD or computer data from their responses, as well as the times from the Traffic Incident Management Center, as well as the heat mapping, we look at how we can use these incidents to show first responders how they can better mitigate these situations without having huge impacts on traffic flow. Again, you can see here they cleared the scene, they started to get traffic moving, and then we had the secondary crash that occurred. And as we know, those secondary crashes are oftentimes fatal or very serious in nature. And that's what happened in this situation. So again, we continue to look at that. Some of the things that we continue to work on is continue to work with the work zone assessments. We're working on the after action reviews involved with the responders. We're looking for those good cases as well as those cases where we can improve responder activities. And then Purdue University and the Department of Transportation are working to use the connected vehicle data to automatically identify those traffic slowdowns or incidents so that it then trains their cameras placed throughout those major corridors to those events so that it quickly notifies the TMCs so that they can start their automatic alerting systems. We're also working with dispatch centers to automatically provide when there's a geographical location, for example, on the interstate, that it automatically notifies the traffic management center of those incidents so that they can immediately start notifying drivers. Again, this program is piloted by the Joint Transportation Research Program through Purdue University in conjunction with the Indiana Department of Transportation.
Wow, that's awesome, Captain. That's a great presentation. And to everyone else out there, can you see how the opportunities we have with UAS moving forward? So, you know, if you have any questions in there, the captain will be with us, and we'll answer them verbally after the other presentations. But, you know, a couple of things that, you know, we identify in there, you know, having that one location, in this case, Purdue University, you're looking at the data and having that one center. Captain, just one quick question while I have you. Does that Purdue handle your crash reconstruction data as well?
Yes, so when we collect those images from the crash scenes, those images are submitted to them. They process them, in this particular case, using Pix4D to process those images, and then they will give us the point cloud results and the respective orthomosaics and other data that then we can use in our crash reconstruction to obtain those detailed measurements and information to do the full-blown reconstruction.